Hello and welcome to Introduction to Epistemology, and today we are going to discuss the concept of self-deception as morally central. The main important question in this chapter is who am I? And this is very important question for everyone in human life, that people know about himself or herself, that who they are and why they are acting in such a way. And if you see the definition in the inverted commas, I have mentioned self-deception could be said to consist in the combination of knowledge and non-knowledge. So what it is meant by knowledge and non-knowledge, sometimes people are not aware who they are. So sometimes they are doing some act, like for example, if someone is lying, if someone is deceiving to other person, to the friend or to the family, so this is actually inside you, which you are doing, or you are deceiving your friends, family members. And the question arises that why is a person act like that? There are two aspects to explain the self-deception. One we can discuss in terms of philosophical context, like the presence of knowledge and non-knowledge. And the second perspective is the psychological perspective. When we discuss the psychological perspective, we can explain in terms of conscious or unconscious. So for example, if you are conscious to do some act, like someone for example want to do robbery or want to do thief or want to steal the things, then what he or she plan to do that act, and then that is in the knowledge, person is doing that act. And then if in other context person is doing robbery without thinking what he is doing, then obviously that is consist of non-knowledge or an unconscious perspective. So the philosophical aspect and the psychological aspect can be explained in different way. What epistemology told, that epistemology discuss in context of the knowledge or non-knowledge, whereas in psychological perspective we discuss in conscious and unconscious, because sometimes there are some psycho killers that do some murders without in their conscious they're doing. And actually the point is we need to understand that who we are, why we are deceiving someone, or why we get deceived by someone. So that is very important question. Maybe if we get deceived because maybe we don't have much knowledge, for example, if there are so many Ponzi schemes, so many scams, if we are not aware of these scams, maybe we get deceived because we have lack of knowledge. We can explain in terms of non-knowledge, but but sometimes we are deceiving to other people, like to family or friends, and then it means that maybe we are not true to your friend, maybe you are not true to your family, or maybe you are not true to yourself what you are doing. So that is the question philosopher arises, that who we are, why we do certain acts in our life, and our behavior is sometimes connected with our conscious and sometimes it connected with our subconscious. And psychology explain them in detail, but in philosophy we are talking about knowledge and non-knowledge context. So if you see in the next line, that in some way I know something in my capacity as a deceiver, that like I discussed, that sometimes I have the knowledge of why I am deceiving someone. Maybe you don't trust your friend, maybe you have some issues with someone, so you are deceiving, but that's obviously morally not correct. But in some way I don't know this, sometimes you are not aware that why you are deceiving someone. That is also important. That is where the question arises, who am I? And sometimes it could be possible that I am get deceived because of my lack of knowledge, like is mentioned in my capacity as deceived as well. So there are different contexts to understand who am I, if we are talking about who we are doing certain acts, or who we get deceived with someone, why we get that. So there are different contexts and different explanation. To understand self-deception, we need to discuss both aspects. One is mentioned not knowing what you have done, and the second is knowing what you have done, and that we will explain to understand who am I. maybe it give you a more clear picture. So when we're talking about not knowing what you have done, the simple answer is, like you can see, remorse is the simple answer. And to understand the remorse, like for example, if someone said bad language or abusive language to your friend, then you can say that, oh, I should not said these words. And remorse is actually defined as acquire a new understanding of it. Sometimes what has happened that some people impulsively act to your friends or to with friends. For example, if you have fight with your best friend, and then you become abusive, and then after certain minutes or a certain period of time you realize that I should not do that act. Or sometimes it could be happen that an impulsive fight between two people can happen, and then after that both get injured, and then after maybe a couple of days you or your friend or the person that you are fighting with realize that I should not do that act. So it is actually a new understanding of the previous act that has been done, and that can be explained in terms of remorse, and that explained in terms of not knowing what you have done. So in that case, when a person is doing this act is impulsive in nature and without thinking. In psychology we can explain in terms of doing some act without thinking that what has been done by you or by your friend. So it could be have a multiple effects, like for example psycho killers, they also do some acts of killing, but they are not intended to do, and they are facing some complicated things in their mind, and they may realize maybe after a certain period of time, but that can be explained in terms of remorse. When we talk about philosophical context, we can explain in terms of both aspects. Like previous example, like for example the murder, the theft or the abusive language, we explain in terms of negative context. Like for example, if someone do morally wrong things and then realize that I should not done that act. But as a philosopher we need to see the both aspect. And remorse could be act in good context, like for example if someone do good deed, maybe if someone is too generous and then someone help somebody, maybe some of your friend or family need some money and you do good deed, and after doing good deed maybe later on you realize that I should not do that act. So again the remorse is usually used in negative context, like I discussed before, but remorse can be happen in good context as well, like helping the people and then realize that I must not do that act. So for philosophical context or for epistemology, we need to see both context. We need to keep this question open either in negative context and it could be happen in positive context. Like Hegel mentioned, remorse can be felt even for the good deed. So this could be example that you are helping someone and later on realize that why I do it. Maybe what happened that you do a good deed, maybe you give some money to your friend, maybe you lend some money, and then later on what happened that the person, your friend, did not return the money, then you can realize that, oh, I must not do that act. So again it could be explained in both context, positive and negative context, and philosophers usually think both context. When we talk about psychology, it could be a different, but philosophy is a different understanding of phenomena that help to understand the better behavior or understanding of a person, that who a person is. Every act a person is doing in his or in her life is connected with sometime with their conscious mind or sometime with their unconscious mind. Some people talk about in terms of subconscious. So again these all acts are meaningful. To understand knowing what you have done, we need to understand about lack of understanding, because in the previous example we are talking about remorse, that person done some act and then the person want to change that context. But if we talk about knowing what you have done, we can explain that people did some act and then later on realize that that act what they did is because they don't have understanding of that, and that can be explained in the last paragraph. Like we mentioned, feeling remorse is to see this lack of understanding, as in some sense what did in my previous lack of understanding were only related to me in external sense. What I did would not an object of remorse, but say a disaster I brought about unintentionally. So what in the last paragraph the author is talking that, you know, sometimes people are doing some act and they are doing certain act because they don't have understanding, and that leads to remorse, or that leads to a disaster, and then that happen unintentionally because person are not aware of that. So when we talk about knowing what you have done, is that person have the knowledge of doing certain act. For example, I give you, like, for example, if you think that your friend is a deceiver or your friend is lying, but actually maybe your friend is not actually lying, and because you think that your friend is lying, or maybe you think that your peers is lying, maybe you don't trust it, and then you act some violent or aggressively, but in fact the things going other around, and the person maybe is not a liar, is not lying, but is only because of lack of trust issue, or maybe because of lack of knowledge about your friend or about your peers, that you think that your friend is lying or a deceiver. So we have to understand in our daily life, sometimes some acts could happen because of lack of understanding about you and about your friend, what your friend is acting. Maybe your friend is doing good for you, but you think that he is deceiving, and it could be happen because of lack of communication between the two people. So we have to understand that sometimes some act happen and then people realize later on, that explained in the first context, or sometimes some act happen is because of lack of understanding that result in that context, or that result in conflict, or that result in any fighting or verbal abuse on any aggressive act. So what the author is talking about in the next slide, that sometimes some sort of act is not because of you which you are doing, sometimes it is act because of unconscious. You are not aware of you're not aware of the environment, or you're not aware of the external environment. So that's why when some acts are introspective in nature, and some aspects or some act are, like, for example, is related to the external world. So the human behavior varies if a person is aware to the external world, or if a person is aware to conscious or the environment, or in other case sometimes some acts is because of person is not aware of his act, he is not in conscious or unconscious. Some people explain in terms of subconscious, and then people act. So thank you so much for today's lecture. Hope to see you again.